You hold the X-ray up to the lamp. Someone's rib cage glows pale against the dark film. Across the bones, somebody has cut a phonograph groove, a thin spiral winding inward to a cigarette burn at the center. You drop it on a turntable, and Elvis Presley starts singing through a stranger's chest. The man who pressed this record paid for the lathe with his own blood. The Soviets would put him in prison. Then they would put him on payroll. Last week, the story of the Acadians stayed with us, a people erased by an empire that wanted them forgotten. This week's tale is different in texture, but not in lever. Stay with me. Between 1946 and the mid-1960s, somewhere between thousands and tens of thousands of records circulated through the Soviet underground. They held the music the regime had outlawed: American jazz, rock and roll, Russian songs sung by performers the state had condemned. Each disc was a single song, etched into a flat sheet of medical X-ray film, sold hand-to-hand on Leningrad and Moscow streets for the price of a meal. They were called ribs, or jazz on the bones. The slang named the imagery on the medium: the rib cages, skulls, hands and spines of anonymous Soviet hospital patients, visible in pale negative on each plate. The slang stuck because the medium was the message. The state controlled what could be remembered. The bootleggers controlled what could be heard. The bones of strangers carried the difference. The first known studio opened in Leningrad in 1946, number 75 Nevsky Prospect. The proprietor was a young man named Stanislav Filon, who had reworked a captured German Telefunken music rewriter into a recording lathe. Filon called the operations Zvukovoe pismo, audio mail. For a fee, you could mail a recording of your own voice to a relative on the other side of the war. The Soviet state approved of this. It was sentimental. It was harmless. It was also, for Filon, a cover. The same machine could cut anything. The hardware was simple enough. A recording lathe carved a continuous phonograph groove, a thin spiral, many concentric rings tightly packed, winding from the edge of the disc inward to a center hole, into the soft surface of a plastic plate. Vinyl was the substrate the rest of the world used. But vinyl was scarce in the post-war USSR. Filon and the bootleggers who followed him found a different substrate in plain sight: hospital X-ray film. The film was free. Soviet hospitals churned through millions of chest X-rays a year for the state's mass tuberculosis screening program. The plates were cellulose nitrate plastic, soft enough for a phonograph stylus. After use, they were thrown out. There were so many of them. No hospital had storage. Bootleggers paid orderlies for stacks, rummaged dumpsters at night, traded vodka for trolley loads. Every plate they retrieved was someone's chest, someone's skull, someone's hand, captured on a soft plastic surface that could be cut. The image on the film was an accident of medical screening. The image was also free. The recording process was crude. The bootlegger placed the X-ray on a turntable beneath the cutting stylus. He fed in the source: a smuggled vinyl record from a sailor's bag, a shortwave broadcast captured on tape, a record left behind in a hotel by a foreign delegation. The stylus traced the spiral, descending across the surface of the plate. Music recorded inward, ring by ring, until the lathe arm reached the cigarette burn that marked the center hole. One song, one side. 3 minutes, maybe 4. 5 to 10 plays before the soft plastic gave way and the music dissolved into static. That last detail, 5 to 10 plays, is the part you have to hold on to. Every listener who put a bone record on a turntable participated in its end. Owning a bone meant using it up. You did not collect these, you consumed them. The Soviet state spent millions of rubles trying to silence the music the bones carried. The bones did the work for them, quietly, in living rooms and dormitories and stairwells, 3 minutes at a time. The repertoire was eclectic and forbidden. American swing, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald. American rock and roll once it arrived. Elvis, Bill Haley, Chuck Berry, eventually the Beatles. Russian émigré recordings the regime had condemned for political reasons. Alexander Vertinsky's Paris Cabaret recordings, Vadim Kozin's pre-war Soviet hits, made illegal after his fall from favor. The most bootlegged voice of all belonged to the Russian tango singer Pyotr Leshchenko, working out of Bucharest, whose recordings the regime had banned in part because Leshchenko was an émigré, in part because he sang tango, and in part because the state had decided his voice represented exactly the kind of decadent Western sentiment Soviet citizens needed to be protected from. To understand why a tango singer's recordings were dangerous in 1948 Leningrad, you have to understand the man who made them so. His name was Andrei Zhdanov. In 1946, Zhdanov, Stalin's chief ideologue, published the doctrine that bears his name. The Zhdanovshchina decrees set the parameters for what Soviet art was permitted to be. Western influence was named as bourgeois decadence. Jazz was specifically denounced. A music critic named Serafim Milovsky summarized the official position in 1946. The hysterical swing and hot music, writhing convulsively with a throaty, broken rhythm and absence of melody. This is what is considered to be real jazz. Between 1948 and 1953, the Soviet stage banned the saxophone outright. The instrument was named treasonous. The slogan that justified the ban entered official discourse. Today, you play saxophone. Tomorrow, you betray your homeland. Soviet composer Isaac Dunaevsky publicly bemoaned the prohibition. The state pressed on. The young people who liked jazz, styliagi, the state called them, a derogatory term meaning stylish ones, were dressed wrong, danced wrong, listened wrong, and thought wrong. The state didn't merely outlaw their music. It outlawed the categories of feeling their music produced, which is why people started cutting bones. By 1950, the underground had developed a name and a circuit. In Leningrad, the largest operation called itself the Golden Dog Gang, a deliberate, mocking tribute to his master's voice. The British Gramophone Company, whose dog mascot, Nipper, was the most recognizable symbol of Western recorded music in the world. 2 men ran it. Ruslan Bogoslawski was the engineer. He had built his own recording lathe from drill parts and a scavenged gramophone. Boris Taygin was the poet and the lyricist. He recorded other people's music on bones, and he recorded his own samizdat poems that could not be published any other way. The state caught them in 1950. Bogoslawski went to the Gulag for 5 years. Taygin went for 7, the longer sentence, because he had also been recording his own samizdat poems on bones. Then Stalin died in March 1953, and they were released early in the Beria amnesty, and they went back to cutting records within weeks. The state caught Bogoslawski again, 2 more years. When he was released the second time, he did not stop. He died in 2003, an old man at his family's house on Lake Hepoyarvi. He never quit. The voice on the bones the Golden Dog Gang cut most often belonged to Pyotr Leshchenko. He had not been in the Soviet Union for most of his life. He sang tango in Bucharest, in a cabaret he owned, to European nobility and Russian émigré aristocracy. He was the king of Russian tango, and Serce, Heart, was the most recognizable Russian-language tango ever recorded. In 1951, after a year of corresponding with Soviet authorities, Leshchenko received permission to settle in the USSR. He and his wife began packing. 1 week later, Romanian police arrested them both. For 3 years, Leshchenko moved between prisons, Jilava, Capul Midea, Borjesht. He developed a gastric ulcer that went untreated. In July 1954, he was transferred to a prison hospital at Targu Okna, where he died, alone, without his wife at his side. She had been released months before, but had not been told her husband was still alive. In Leningrad the same year, Leshchenko's voice spiraled inward across hundreds of stolen chest X-rays into thousands of bedrooms, 3 minutes at a time. The man on the bones did not know. In 1956, in Leningrad, an 18-year-old named Rudy Fuchs walked into a Soviet medical clinic and sold his blood. The state paid donors a few rubles per draw. Fuchs walked out with enough money in his coat pocket to buy a recording lathe, the same kind Filon had built 10 years earlier from a Telefunken machine. The same kind Bogoslawski had assembled in the Gulag's shadow from a drill and a gramophone. He went home and cut his first bone record that night. You should sit with what that exchange meant. The state took his blood. The state paid him for it. The state recorded the transaction. The state had given him exactly enough money, exactly the right amount, no more, to buy the instrument that would let him violate the state's law about what he could listen to. The body gave, the body received, the body bought the means to subvert the body's own surveillance. Fuchs would press his first stranger's chest, X-ray, onto the turntable, set the stylus, and cut a song the state had banned into the surface of an image the state had paid for. Every plate he ever recorded contained 2 transactions: the state's record of someone's lungs and his record of someone's song. The same flat plastic carried both. That was the practice. That was always the practice. Fuchs is just the one who made the math visible. By 1958, the state had figured out it had a problem. In 1958, the Soviet government passed a decree explicitly criminalizing the home recording of a criminally hooligan trend. The bone records were now illegal by name. The state press began encouraging teenagers to denounce friends who shared the records. The KGB ran sting operations through Leningrad and Moscow apartment buildings. The largest known ring was broken up in 1959. By the early 1960s, the high-volume era was effectively over. But here is where the story ends differently from where the state intended it to. The decree, the denunciations, the arrests, the labor camps, none of them stopped the bones. The bones stopped because the state, in the same 5-year window, made a different decision. The Soviet Union began mass-producing reel-to-reel tape recorders for the consumer market. The Yauza, the Astra. By the end of the 1960s, the state had sold tens of millions of these machines into Soviet households. By the end of the 1970s, that number would be in the tens of millions and growing. Reel-to-reel tape was cheaper than X-ray film. It played longer than 3 minutes per side. It did not wear through after 10 listens. It sounded better. And, critically, the state did not ban it. The state sold it, officially, through state channels, with official receipts. The bone records did not need to be confiscated or banned or punished out of existence. They simply became obsolete. Why would anyone risk a gulag sentence for a single song on a degrading X-ray plate when they could record an entire album in better fidelity on a legal machine the state had sold them? The bootleggers switched media. Magnetizdat, tape publishing, replaced Röntgenizdat almost overnight. The same forbidden music kept circulating on the same hand-to-hand circuits, just on a different substrate. Some of the bootleggers kept going, some did not. Rudy Fuchs is one of the ones who kept going. He served his prison sentence for the crime on the books of speculation in cultural goods. When he came out, the underground had migrated to tape. By the mid-1960s, Fuchs had a tape operation. By the late 1960s, he had a small business renting his record collection by the hour to customers who wanted to dub it at home. By the early 1970s, the Soviet state hired him as an official producer at a state-affiliated record label. The man who sold his blood to cut forbidden music into a stranger's ribcage was, by his late 30s, drawing a Soviet paycheck for producing approved music for the same state that had jailed him. The state's revenge on Rudy Fuchs was to give him a job. In 2012, a British musician named Stephen Coates was performing in St. Petersburg with his band. On a free afternoon, he wandered through a flea market and stopped at a stall selling old vinyl. The dealer had a single-chest X-ray lying flat on the table, a phonograph spiral cut across the ribs, a cigarette burn at the center where the spindle hole had been. Coates asked what it was. The dealer told him. Coates bought the plate, took it home, and started looking for the people who had made things like it. Most of them were dead. Some of them were not. The ones who were still alive, and they were old by then, in their 70s and 80s, hands shaking. Told him about Filon, the Golden Dog Gang, Fuchs, Leshchenko, the whole machinery of it. What he was building would become the X-ray Audio Project. The book came out in 2015. The exhibition program toured shortly after. The bones are in museums now. The X-ray Audio Project has toured exhibitions through Moscow, Berlin, London, Tel Aviv. There are books. There is a documentary. The original bootleggers, the ones still alive, give interviews. Ruslan Bogoslawski died in 2003 before any of this began, before anyone showed up at his door to tell him that what he had done mattered. Pyotr Leshchenko died in a Romanian prison hospital in 1954, never knowing that his voice was circulating through bedrooms 5,000 kilometers away, etched into the chests of strangers. And Rudy Fuchs, the bootlegger who sold his blood to cut his first bone record, who served prison time for it, who became a state-sanctioned producer in the same regime that jailed him. Rudy Fuchs is the answer to a question the regime never realized it was asking. The state did not ban the bones. The state replaced them. The music walked out of the underground and onto a state catalogue. The bones were never outlawed. They were just made obsolete.